She was a millionaire CEO who thought she had everything under control until her rebellious teenage daughter was caught vandalizing the school. But when the girl was placed under the watch of a quiet janitor, a single father with nothing to his name, what unfolded would shake a billion-dollar empire, expose buried secrets, and open a door the entire city had been blind to. Evelyn Hart's morning had begun with the same polished rhythm as most of her days. The driver dropped her off at the towering Heartworks headquarters. Her assistant handed her a slim folder with highlighted points for the board meeting, and the elevator doors closed her into a world of glass, steel, and order. At 35, she was the picture of control. Sharp blonde hair pinned neatly, brown eyes unflinching, her presence a mixture of authority and elegance. Yet beneath that flawless exterior was the constant, gnawing awareness that she was failing in the one place that mattered most, her home. Halfway through the quarterly report presentation, her phone buzzed in a way that told her it wasn't business. The name of the school flashed on the screen, and something inside her went cold. She excused herself, striding out with heels that clicked like a metronome, but inside she was reeling. The voice on the other end was strained, professional, but edged with disappointment. Zoe, her 13-year-old daughter, had been caught with a box cutter in her pocket, standing beside a vandalized school banner and a spray-painted wall. Evelyn's heart sank. When she arrived at the school, the scene felt almost staged, like some cruel parody. On the wide concrete steps stood a tall man in a gray work shirt, dark hair falling just over his brow, his expression calm but unyielding. In his hand was the box cutter, taped now as evidence. At his side slouched Zoe, hoodie pulled low, eyes hidden but her stance radiating defiance. Evelyn's breath caught at the sight of her daughter like this, untamed, unreachable. "I didn't slash it," Zoe muttered before her mother could even speak. Her voice was flat, stubborn. "I cut a piece of the banner to patch the broken door. And the spray paint?" Evelyn's tone was sharp enough to cut through steel. Zoe didn't meet her eyes. "It was my design for the art contest. They'd just say it was too much anyway." Before Evelyn could lash back, the man in the work shirt spoke, his voice low and steady. "I'm Lucas Reed, custodian here. Found her near the back entrance. The door was split at the hinge. She wasn't lying about that. She patched it with the banner. As for the paint, the wall was already covered with tags. What she added wasn't offensive. It was something else." Evelyn turned her gaze on him, cool and cutting, but his words didn't carry excuses. They carried a kind of matter-of-fact respect that unsettled her. She signed the suspension papers with a swift hand, barely glancing at Zoe, because if she looked too long, the fury and the ache would mix into something unbearable. As she turned to leave, she caught a fragment of his voice directed at her daughter. "Good thinking with the banner, but a knife isn't a toy, and walls aren't sketchbooks. If you want people to see what you see, there's a better way." Zoe finally looked up, her eyes flickering with curiosity despite herself. "Like what?" "Come by after classes. I'll show you." The audacity of it made Evelyn stop short for just a heartbeat. She wanted to forbid it, to snap that her daughter didn't need lessons from a janitor. But the way Zoe's shoulders straightened, the way a spark of interest replaced the dull defiance in her eyes, silenced her. Evelyn left without another word, the weight of her daughter's silence pressing harder than the scorn of her board ever could. That night, in her penthouse apartment high above the city, Evelyn poured herself a glass of wine she didn't finish. Her phone lit up with congratulatory messages about the morning's presentation, about the stock's climb, about numbers and power and prestige. Yet her thoughts refused to leave that school staircase, the grimy box cutter, and the calm voice of the man who dared to speak to Zoe like she was more than a problem to be contained. She stared out over the city lights, her reflection caught in the glass. In every reflection, she saw the same thing. A woman who could run a corporation worth billions, but who could not reach her own child. And now a stranger, a janitor no less, had managed in one afternoon to say words that lingered where all of hers had been ignored. It was the first fracture in Evelyn's perfect facade, a small crack invisible to the world, but she felt it widening. And for the first time in years, she feared she might not be able to mend it on her own. Zoe stood hesitantly in the narrow hallway that smelled faintly of floor polish and old paint. She had told herself she wasn't going to come, that Lucas Reed's invitation was just another adult's way of lecturing her. But something about his tone earlier in the day, steady, without judgment, like he wasn't trying to fix her, but to show her, had stuck in her chest. And so, after classes, instead of storming out of the building as usual, she found herself staring at the door marked in faded letters. Maintenance. Staff only. Lucas appeared from around the corner, pushing a cart stacked with paint cans and brushes. He looked almost surprised to see her waiting, but his surprise softened into something else. Acknowledgement. Not the pity she despised. Without a word, he unlocked the door and gestured her inside. The room was nothing like Zoe expected. Instead of a cluttered broom closet, it was more like a workshop in disguise. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with neatly arranged tools, levels, trowels, plaster buckets, coiled extension cords, boxes of tiles, rows of paint samples. On the workbench sat an old slide projector surrounded by scraps of plexiglass and markers. It was a hidden world of function and creation, not chaos. Lucas set the cart aside and pulled a small spotlight over the bench. "This," he said, lifting a chunk of cracked drywall, "is a problem. And this," he continued, mixing plaster in a tray with steady hands, "is a way to make it disappear." He pressed a trowel into her hands, showing her how to spread the plaster into the jagged line. She tried, awkward at first, smearing too much, then too little. But he guided her hand, his touch light, never intrusive. "Not about force," he said. "It's about patience. Layer it. Smooth it. Wait. Then the wall holds." As she pressed the plaster, Zoe felt something strange. Like the wall's crack was a reflection of her own anger, and covering it gave her an odd, unexpected calm. She worked silently, focused. And when the surface began to look smooth again, Lucas nodded approvingly. "You've got precision," he told her. "When you paint over walls, your lines aren't wild. They're deliberate. You don't want chaos. You want to be noticed." Zoe frowned, trying not to let his words sink too deeply. "No one notices anyway." Lucas crouched, meeting her eyes. "Wrong. People just don't notice noise. If you want them to listen, you show them clarity. Give them something worth protecting." He led her to the projector, setting a slide of a city mural in place. When he clicked it on, color burst across the plain wall. Towering images of faces, hands, and bright patterns glowed in the dim maintenance room. "Not mine," he said, "but I helped prime the wall for this one. No one remembers the man who patched the cracks. But without that work, the art falls apart." Zoe stared, transfixed. "It's beautiful," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop it. Lucas didn't smile in triumph. He only gave a small nod. "If you want people to see you, fix something first, then show them what you see." They worked together until the sun dipped low, the room filling with shadows. Lucas showed her how to sand the plaster smooth, how to mix primer, how to test colors against each other. Her hands grew sore, dust clung to her clothes, but for the first time in a long while she felt proud of what they had done. That night, when Evelyn came home late from the office, she found Zoe already asleep on the couch, a sketchbook lying open on her chest. The page held a drawing of a tall white door glowing with golden hinges. From behind the door poured light, spilling over a staircase where a small figure reached upward toward the handle. Evelyn stared at it for a long moment, her chest tightening. It was just a sketch, but to her it looked like a confession. Her daughter had built a world where doors were locked against her, and she was desperate for one to finally open. The following week unfolded in a way that felt almost foreign to Evelyn. Every day when she checked the school updates, Zoe wasn't listed as missing classes, or hiding in the bathroom, or being written up for another act of defiance. Instead, she was serving her suspension hours under Lucas's supervision. To Evelyn, it sounded like punishment. But when she caught sight of her daughter one afternoon walking beside Lucas, paint stains on her hoodie and a faint smear of plaster dust across her cheek, Zoe looked more alive than she had in months. Lucas had found ways to give Zoe tasks that mattered. She sanded peeling paint from the railings on the stairwell, rolled fresh coats of color onto benches in the courtyard, and learned how to mix small batches of plaster to patch over holes in the walls. These weren't idle chores. They were lessons disguised as work. Zoe approached them with a focus Evelyn had not seen in her since she was a child obsessed with drawing late into the night. Each time Zoe smoothed a seam, her shoulders straightened a little more, as if she were mending something inside herself along with the walls. Evelyn tried to tell herself this was a temporary distraction, but even she could not deny that the shift was real. She had meetings, audits, deadlines, but her thoughts drifted back to her daughter and this man who had managed to create a space where Zoe could stand taller. She wanted to hate him for doing what she could not. Instead, she found herself unsettled, drawn to the idea that maybe Zoe needed something Evelyn didn't know how to give. One evening, Evelyn left the office earlier than usual, curiosity pulling her to the school. The building was nearly deserted, hallways dim except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights. Voices and faint movement came from the gymnasium. She approached quietly and stopped just outside the glass doors. Inside, Zoe and Lucas worked in respirators, painting sealant across a massive wooden backboard that had just been replaced. Zoe's strokes were careful, her small hands steady. Lucas moved beside her, guiding, showing her where the coating needed to be thicker. When they finished, Zoe took out a fine brush and began painting pale circles on the surface. Evelyn realized she was sketching a rising sun. When Lucas stepped into the hallway to remove his mask and gloves, Evelyn was waiting. Her eyes were sharp, her voice clipped. "Why are you here after hours? This isn't part of your job description." He didn't flinch. "Because during the day there's no time, and because the air's cleaner at night. You're not a teacher. Number, I'm someone who's been invisible long enough. Do you know how many choices get made as if we don't exist? The ones who fix it all later?" His words hit her harder than she expected. She crossed her arms. "And where did you learn all of this? Carpentry, plaster, paint?" Lucas leaned back against the wall, his voice quiet but unwavering. "From my older brother. He taught me everything on sites. 5 years ago, he died in a collapse. Cheap equipment, a cut corner that someone signed off on to save a little money. I've been angry ever since. But anger doesn't patch a wall. Work does. Patience does. Teaching does," Evelyn swallowed, stunned into silence. For years, she had approved reports, signed contracts, nodded at spreadsheets. Never once had she seen the face of the man who carried the weight of those cost cuts. Until now. She realized she was still staring when Zoe appeared at the door, mask hanging around her neck, hair damp from sweat. For a brief second, Zoe looked terrified to see her mother standing there. Evelyn walked forward, reached out, and adjusted the mask strap gently. Her voice softened. "You're doing well. The lines are even." Zoe blinked at her, surprised. Then slowly a small smile spread across her face, genuine, open, and directed at Evelyn. It was the first real smile her daughter had given her in months. Evelyn stood frozen, the weight of it sinking in. Somehow, in the company of this janitor, her daughter was not only finding focus, but finding her way back to her mother, piece by fragile piece. And Evelyn knew she could not afford to ignore it, even if it unsettled every wall she had built around her own life. The scandal began before dawn, as the first commuters spilled onto the streets and lifted their eyes to the towering glass facade of Heartworks headquarters. Across the mirrored surface, a giant glowing image shimmered in the early morning haze. A tall white door, painted in light, its golden hinges shining against the skyscraper. And framing the door were words, names scrolling upward in bold handwritten letters. Janitors, welders, cafeteria workers, cleaners, security guards, receptionists, laundry staff. At the very bottom, in smaller script, were two words that struck like a challenge. Open it. The city froze in astonishment. By 8 a.m., photos of the projection flooded social media. By 9, news anchors called it a guerrilla art protest. By 10, Heartworks' board of directors was demanding answers. Evelyn's phone lit up with furious messages while she sat in her office, her hand gripping the edge of the desk until her knuckles whitened. She didn't need a report to know who was responsible. Security found them within an hour. Zoe, bundled in a hoodie with her sketchbook clutched against her chest, and Lucas, carrying the old projector Evelyn now recognized from his maintenance room. They had set it up in the parking garage across from the tower, and though they hadn't used a drop of paint, the city was treating it like an act of defacement. Evelyn rushed down to the subterranean level where they were being held. Zoe sat hunched in a metal chair, her knees pulled up, her hair falling like a curtain across her face. Lucas sat beside her, calm as ever, his large hands resting flat on the table, his expression unreadable. The head of security stood over them with visible disgust. "We can call the police right now," he said when Evelyn entered, his voice sharp. "It's corporate sabotage, an attack on reputation." Evelyn ignored him. She looked first at her daughter, then at Lucas. "Why?" she asked, her voice heavy with restrained fury. Zoe lifted her face slowly. Her eyes were rimmed red, but there was no apology in them, only resolve. "It was my idea. You don't see them. Nobody does. I wanted you to see, not through spreadsheets or reports, but like this. A door for everyone, not just for the ones with clearance cards." Evelyn's throat tightened, but before she could respond, Lucas spoke. His voice was steady, deliberate. "She wanted to be heard. I helped her carry the equipment, made sure it was light, not paint. No damage, just visibility." The security officer scoffed. "Visibility? You've already caused damage to reputation that will cost millions. Do you know what this means for our investors?" "Enough," Evelyn snapped, cutting him off. Her gaze shifted back to her daughter, and in that moment, the weight of her fear wasn't about the shareholders or the headlines. It was about the fragile, trembling bond she had only just begun to feel between them. She realized with a pang that she was terrified of crushing it completely if she reacted the way everyone expected her to. She crossed the room and sat beside Zoe, who flinched at first, then froze in confusion. Evelyn reached out, her hand hovering near her daughter's, and spoke quietly so only Zoe could hear. "I see it," she said. "I see you, and I don't want to close it." For the first time, Zoe's lips parted in surprise, her eyes widening as though she hadn't dared believe her mother could understand. Evelyn squeezed her hand, then rose to face the room. "There will be no police. There will be no charges. This is a family matter." The head of security bristled. "With respect, Ms. Hart, the board won't like this." "The board can wait," Evelyn said sharply. "I'll deal with them." Later that evening, her office was a storm of voices, the board demanding discipline, punishment, distance. They called Lucas a liability, an agitator, a risk to her reputation and the company's stability. Investors wanted reassurance. PR consultants suggested publicly denouncing both Zoe and the custodian to salvage credibility. Evelyn listened, her back straight, her hands folded, her face calm. But inside, a war raged. Part of her, the part trained for decades in the ruthless world of corporate leadership, wanted to calculate, to sacrifice, to protect the empire. But another part, the part that had heard her daughter's small, trembling voice in that holding room, refused to bend. When the voices faded, Evelyn stood. "This company was built on people like the names you saw this morning. If we can't acknowledge them, then maybe we deserve the scandal." Dismissed. The room went silent with shock. She left before they could regroup, her heels clicking like drum beats in the corridor. She felt the weight of the city pressing down, the storm gathering outside. Yet beneath the chaos, she also felt something else, a crack opening in the life she had built so carefully. A crack not of weakness, but of possibility. That night, Lucas knocked on her office door long after everyone else had gone. He carried no tools, no cart, only a file folder and a look that told her the real confrontation was only beginning. The office was nearly silent when Lucas stepped inside. The usual hum of printers and murmurs of assistants had died hours ago, leaving only the muffled buzz of the city beyond the glass walls. Evelyn sat at her desk with her blazer draped over the chair behind her, her blouse sleeves rolled up, a rare sign of fatigue. She looked up when he entered, her brown eyes sharp but weighed down with something that even power couldn't conceal. Lucas set a worn file folder on her polished desk. The paper edges were frayed, as though it had been carried around for years. He didn't sit immediately. He stood, hands braced on the back of the chair across from her, and said simply, "You should see this." Evelyn arched a brow but opened the folder. Inside were photocopied reports, grainy photographs of collapsed scaffolding, handwritten witness accounts, and official statements stamped with Heartworks' subsidiary logos. One picture made her stomach turn. A cracked helmet lying in the rubble, its surface spattered with dust and dark stains. Lucas's voice cut through the silence, low and steady. "My brother's name was Kevin. He was 29. He worked overtime shifts on a site your company oversaw. The harness straps were frayed. The anchor point wasn't tested. He fell 4 stories when the platform buckled. The paperwork said, subcontractor oversight. No lawsuit, no settlement. Just another report filed under cost-saving measures. Evelyn felt her pulse spike. She had read hundreds of these reports in her career, always filed neatly away with explanations that sounded clean and clinical. Isolated incident, equipment malfunction, safety review pending. But hearing it in Lucas's voice, the raw human weight of it, shredded the distance those words had given her. She closed the folder with trembling hands. "I didn't know," she said finally, her voice quieter than she intended. "I didn't know the details." Lucas lowered himself into the chair across from her, his eyes dark but not raging. "Of course you didn't. They never give the details to people like you. They hand you charts and bottom lines and tell you everything's under control. But people like Kevin pay for those lines with their lives. And I've been carrying this file ever since. Not to throw it in your face, but because I needed to remind myself why I stay, why I fix, why I teach kids how to use tools safely. Because I can't bring him back, but I can stop someone else from being buried in paperwork instead of remembered as a person." Evelyn leaned back, pressing her fingers to her temples. "You think I wanted this? That I signed contracts knowing lives would be destroyed?" "I think you didn't look," Lucas said evenly. "And not looking is the same as letting it happen." The words hit her like a blow, and for a long moment she didn't respond. The glass windows stretched out behind her, showing the glittering city skyline, her empire of numbers and lights. And yet at that moment, it felt fragile, like glass itself. She looked back at him. His face was steady, his jaw tense, but there was no cruelty in his expression. He wasn't here to humiliate her. He was here because he couldn't keep silent anymore. "I was afraid of you," she admitted suddenly, surprising herself. "Because my daughter listens to you. Because you've done in days what I haven't been able to do in years. That scared me. But right now, what I fear more is that this bond you've built with Zoe will be torn apart because of me. Because of my company. Because of everything I failed to see." Lucas held her gaze for a long time, and for the first time something softened in his features. "If I walk away now, Zoe will go back to searching for walls to paint in the middle of the night. She'll go back to cutting herself into spaces where no one wants her. She doesn't need me as a savior. She needs consistency, someone who shows up. If you want her to heal, don't take this from her." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. She wasn't used to being told what she couldn't control, and yet she knew he was right. She swallowed hard and nodded once. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't the brittle silence of hostility. It was heavy, weighted with unspoken truths, but also with a strange, fragile recognition. The next morning, Evelyn shocked the boardroom when she entered with the file under her arm. Instead of burying it, she laid it out on the table. "We're initiating a full internal audit of every subcontractor," she said firmly, "effective immediately. And the operations director who signed off on these cost-cutting measures is suspended pending investigation." The room erupted in outrage. Executives barked about investor panic, about liability, about headlines. Evelyn stood her ground, her spine iron straight. For the first time in years, she wasn't speaking for the shareholders. She was speaking for the people whose names she had never before known. As the meeting dissolved into chaos, she caught sight of her reflection in the polished surface of the conference table. She hardly recognized herself. Not the glossy, untouchable CEO the world had come to expect, but a woman who was beginning, finally, to see the cracks in her own walls. Outside the glass tower, the city kept moving, unaware that inside a battle had begun that would either shatter everything she'd built or rebuild it stronger than before. And in the quiet of her heart, Evelyn knew she had chosen her side. The storm rolled in on a Tuesday, sudden and heavy, the kind of summer storm that split the sky with jagged light and sent thunder rattling through the city. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds pressed down over the school, and rain lashed against the windows so fiercely the classrooms rattled. Evelyn had been in a board meeting when she received the frantic call. There had been an accident in the old cafeteria wing. A gas line had leaked. A spark in the electrical panel had caught. Smoke was filling the corridors. Children were panicking. By the time Evelyn's car reached the school, fire trucks were already parked in a crooked row outside, their red lights strobing against the wet pavement. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burning insulation. She shoved her way past the crowd of parents and teachers, her heart in her throat, searching for any glimpse of Zoe. Sirens wailed, firefighters shouted orders, and then she saw him. Lucas, his shirt blackened with soot, pushing open a jammed door with his shoulder while children poured out around him. His arms guided them down the steps in lines, his voice carrying over the chaos. Hand to hand, eyes on me. Keep moving. You're safe. Zoe appeared next, her face pale beneath a too large respirator mask. Her hands gripped two smaller children, one on each side, steadying them as they stumbled toward the exit. Evelyn's chest seized with both terror and pride. Her daughter was doing exactly what Lucas had taught her. Methodical, calm, her strength not in shouting, but in steady presence. A crash erupted behind them. Part of the ceiling in the cafeteria collapsed, raining debris and sparks. Evelyn screamed, but Lucas was already moving, throwing himself across the gap, shielding the elderly cafeteria manager with his own body as fragments of plaster and wood fell. He winced, caught in the impact, but didn't falter. With one arm he dragged her clear, coughing through the smoke. Firefighters swarmed in, hoses roaring, water hissing as it met flame. Lucas staggered out with the woman leaning against him, his chest heaving, his hands raw from forcing open doors. The firefighters pulled her away to check her vitals, but he waved off the medics until every child was out. His eyes scanned the crowd, not for himself, but for Zoe. When he finally spotted her, still clutching the younger kids, his body sagged in relief. And then Evelyn was there, running to her daughter, pulling her into her arms, trembling as she held her close. Zoe clung back, too shocked to speak, her small frame shaking against Evelyn's chest. Evelyn looked over her daughter's head at Lucas, and for a moment, time stilled. His face was streaked with ash, a gash along his arm, sweat soaking through his shirt. But in his eyes there was only one question. Is she safe? Evelyn nodded, tears stinging her eyes, unable to form words. Later, when the flames were under control and the children had been taken to the gym for safety checks, Evelyn walked the charred hallway alongside the fire chief. He explained that one of the old exits had been newly reinforced, the locks replaced, the emergency lighting recently wired. Without that, he admitted, half the school would have been trapped in the smoke. Whoever fixed it saved lives. Evelyn knew immediately who it had been. Lucas, days ago, had worked late repairing the emergency exit no one else had thought twice about. He hadn't told anyone. He never did. But that door had been the difference between chaos and survival. By evening, the story was everywhere. Local news stations broadcast footage of Lucas leading students through the smoke, carrying the cafeteria manager out, standing like a pillar in the midst of the storm. Photos of him beside Zoe at the white-painted exit door spread across social media, reshared with captions like, "The janitor who saved a school." Evelyn watched it all unfold from her penthouse, Zoe asleep on the couch beside her, still smelling, faintly of smoke. She scrolled through the endless stream of comments, of gratitude, of outrage at how invisible he had been until disaster forced people to see him. For once, the narrative wasn't about Heartworks stock prices or boardroom maneuvering. It was about humanity, about a man who risked himself for children who weren't his own. And Evelyn, staring out at the storm breaking over the city, knew that nothing could go back to the way it was. The walls of silence she had once thought protected her empire had already cracked wide open. Lucas had saved lives, but he had also forced her to confront the truth she had avoided for years, that she had built her company on numbers and reports, not on the lives underneath them. The board would demand explanations. Investors would press her for spin, but in her chest she felt something stronger than fear. A certainty that the door her daughter had dreamed of wasn't just a drawing anymore. It was real, and it was open. And she was ready finally to walk through it. The days after the fire felt like a different lifetime. For once, the headlines weren't about quarterly gains or acquisitions. They were about the children who had walked out alive, the cafeteria manager recovering in the hospital, and the man the city now called a hero. Reporters crowded outside the school gates, not for Evelyn, but for Lucas Reed, the janitor who had carried kids through smoke and forced open doors with his bare hands. Evelyn watched it unfold with a mix of gratitude and unease. Gratitude because he had saved her daughter. Unease because she knew how quickly the world could turn praise into scrutiny. It didn't take long for the board to summon her. They gathered around the long table like hawks, their suits crisp, their voices sharp. "The narrative is spiraling," one said. "We can't have a school custodian tied to the CEO's family, especially not one with a history of agitation." Another added, Your daughter's stunt with the projection has already drawn unwanted attention. If you embrace this man now, you risk legitimizing him. Evelyn listened, her face unreadable. Inside, she was seething. For years, she had allowed these voices to dictate her choices, to reduce human lives to percentages and liabilities. But after watching Zoe's pale face emerge from smoke, after seeing Lucas's hands shaking with exhaustion as he counted heads, she could no longer stomach their coldness. When the room quieted, Evelyn stood. He saved dozens of children, including my daughter. He is not a liability. He is proof of what this company has failed to honor. The people who hold it together, unseen. We will not bury him. We will follow his lead. The words left the board stunned. Some erupted in protests, others muttered about shareholders. Evelyn silenced them with a raised hand. If our investors abandon us because we acknowledge the invisible, then let them. We will find others. The very next week, she announced a new initiative. It was called Invisible Hands. Heartworks would fund safety programs across the city, starting with schools. The program's purpose was simple: to ensure that no crack went unpatched, no vent uncleaned, no exit door forgotten. And at its helm, she named Lucas Reed as Director of Safety Operations. The board tried to block it, but public support swept them back. The footage of Lucas in the fire had burned itself into the city's memory. Evelyn knew they couldn't fight the tide, not this time. For Zoe, the initiative became a lifeline. She was the first to join a branch called the Wall Studio, where students collaborated with custodians, electricians, cafeteria staff, and other invisible workers to create something together. At first it was small, painting benches, planting flowers near the entrance. But then the project grew. Lucas suggested a mural, something that would stand as both a symbol and a lesson. Zoe's sketch was chosen, a white door glowing with light, silhouettes of workers stepping through it, each marked with a name. It wasn't just art, it was recognition. Evelyn attended their sessions sometimes, standing quietly in the corner, watching her daughter kneel on the pavement with chalk, outlining figures with precision. Watching Lucas kneel beside her, not taking over, not commanding, just showing her how to measure space and balance color. The laughter of kids mixing paint mingled with the steady instructions of electricians teaching how to rig the lighting that would make the mural glow at night. For the first time, Evelyn saw what collaboration looked like without hierarchy. It wasn't about command, it was about hands joined together, each role essential. When she finally addressed the public, Evelyn did not stand on a stage surrounded by polished executives. She stood in front of the unfinished mural, Zoe on one side and Lucas on the other. Her voice carried through the microphones. This company has built towers, bridges, and cities. But for too long, we have overlooked the very hands that make those structures stand. We apologize to every family who has lost someone because of our neglect. From this day forward, we will not just build, we will protect, and we will remember. Reporters erupted with questions. Some investors balked, others quietly withdrew. But to Evelyn's surprise, new voices rose. Partners who believed in the program, donors who wanted to contribute, families who had lost loved ones but now felt seen. The tide was shifting. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Evelyn returned to the mural site. The street was quiet except for the soft scratch of chalk. Zoe was crouched low, tracing the outline of the door's golden hinges. Lucas stood by the scaffolding, adjusting spotlights. He looked up when Evelyn approached, his face lit by the faint glow of the street lamps. "Did you ever think it would turn out like this?" she asked. "No," he admitted, tightening the screws on the fixture. "I only hoped one door would open." Evelyn followed his gaze to her daughter, who was humming softly as she worked, the girl who had once hidden behind walls of defiance now drawing walls that invited light. Evelyn's throat tightened, and for the first time in years, she felt something like peace. "Yes," she said quietly. It opened. They stood side by side, not touching, not speaking further, but bound by an understanding that neither of them needed to name. The door was no longer just an idea in Zoe's sketchbook. It was rising brick by brick, paint stroke by paint stroke, into something that would outlast them all. The unveiling took place at dusk, when the last streaks of sunlight burned gold across the skyline, and the city seemed to hold its breath. The mural had been covered for days, hidden behind scaffolding and tarps, the whispers about it growing louder with each passing hour. Crowds lined the street in front of the Heartworks Tower, not just employees and executives, but families, students, construction workers, cafeteria staff, even passers-by who had heard about the project that had captured the city's attention. Cameras stood ready, journalists murmured into microphones, and drones hovered overhead, waiting to capture the moment. Evelyn stood at the front, her hair pulled back in a simple knot, no designer jewelry, no sharp power suit. She wore a plain navy dress and held the microphone with both hands. For a moment, she looked almost small against the sheer wall of glass and steel behind her. But when she began to speak, her voice was clear, steady, stripped of the polish that usually coated her speeches. "For years, I built walls of glass and concrete," she said, her words echoing across the plaza. "I thought they made us strong, but inside those walls, too many cracks went unseen. Too many names were left out. Tonight, we open a different kind of wall, a wall that doesn't hide people, but honors them." She paused, her eyes finding Zoe in the crowd. Her daughter stood among her classmates, her sketchbook clutched to her chest, her face glowing with anticipation. Evelyn's throat tightened, but she pushed through. "This mural was designed by someone who saw what I did not. My daughter reminded me that a door isn't just for those with passes or clearance. A door is for everyone. And when you open it, light comes through." There was silence as she lowered the microphone, then a murmur as Zoe stepped forward. She was pale but determined, her hands shaking slightly as she took the mic. Her voice was softer, almost fragile, but the quiet made the crowd lean in. "This door is for the people no one notices," she said. "The ones who sweep floors, carry boxes, fix lights, cook meals, clean up after others. The ones who are always here but never seen. This isn't a protest, it's an invitation. To open the door, to look inside, to see us." The crowd erupted into applause, loud and unrestrained. Evelyn's eyes blurred with tears as she watched her daughter stand taller, her chin lifted, her voice no longer trapped behind anger, but carried by purpose. At last, the tarp fell away, and the mural came alive. Against the darkening sky, the painted white door blazed, its golden hinges gleaming, light pouring out across the wall in radiant strokes. From the light emerged silhouettes of workers in every form: janitors with mops, welders with helmets, nurses with clipboards, cafeteria staff with trays, teachers with books. Each figure had a name etched beside them, names Zoe and her classmates had painstakingly chosen from real people they interviewed. And at the edge of the mural was one figure Evelyn had not expected but recognized immediately. A young man in a construction helmet, drawn from an old photograph. Kevin Reed, Lucas's brother. Lucas stood off to the side, his arms folded, his shoulders stiff. When he saw his brother's likeness, he gripped the railing so tightly his knuckles whitened. His eyes shimmered, but he didn't move until Evelyn stepped close. Her voice was low, just for him. "Thank you for the door." He shook his head slightly, his voice rough. "It wasn't me, it was many hands. And one girl who wouldn't let it stay closed." Zoe beamed from across the plaza, handing out small prints of her sketch to younger kids who crowded around her, each one clutching the image of the shining door like a talisman. Laughter bubbled up around her, unguarded and bright, and Evelyn felt her heart swell at the sight. The girl who once scrawled on walls in anger was now building something the entire city wanted to touch. The applause didn't fade. People chanted, clapped, some even wept. Local stations called it the year's kindest surprise. Investors who had threatened to pull out began to call back, their tone transformed. "There's something real here," they admitted. "People trust this." For the first time in her career, Evelyn saw numbers rising not because of marketing, but because of sincerity. Later that night, when the crowds dispersed and the mural glowed softly under newly installed lights, Evelyn, Lucas, and Zoe climbed to the roof of the Heartworks Tower. The city stretched beneath them, alive and endless. The glass of neighboring skyscrapers reflected the mural's glow, as if the light from the painted door was spilling into every corner of the skyline. Lucas leaned against the railing, his voice low but steady. "The right kind of work is like fixing a wall. First you find the crack. Then you don't cover it with wallpaper. You mend it. Honest, messy, slow. But that's how the house stands." Evelyn smiled faintly, the wind tugging at her hair. "I spent my life pasting wallpaper. Glossy, perfect wallpaper. Now I'll learn to mend." Zoe stretched out on the concrete beside them, gazing up at the sky. Her voice carried softly, filled with a confidence Evelyn had never heard before. And I'll paint, but only on walls that are ready for it. For a long moment, the three of them sat in silence, listening to the hum of the city, the faint laughter drifting from below, the steady beat of their own hearts. And then, without grandeur or spectacle, they laughed together, light, unforced, the laughter of people who had come through fire and found each other on the other side. The ending wasn't a grand crescendo, it was warmth. A woman who had once been nothing more than a glossy magazine cover had become human again. A janitor who had lived as an invisible shadow had been seen. A girl who once hid her voice behind anger now used it to create light. And the city, for the first time in a long while, had gained not just a mural, but a door. An open door, through which anyone could step and know they mattered. For me, this story is not just a drama about a wealthy woman and an invisible janitor. At its heart, it is about the collision of two worlds, the world of luxury and control, and the world of ordinary, unseen people whose shoulders carry everything. The ending feels symbolic because their paths converge not in a loud triumph, not in scandal, but in an open door. Evelyn gained the humanity she had always lacked behind her cold reports and walls of glass. Lucas stopped being a shadow and became a voice the entire city could hear. And Zoe, the girl full of pain and rebellion, finally found her place and her strength to speak, not through destruction, but through creation. I see this ending as a reminder. Real change doesn't come when skyscrapers fall or when applause thunders. Real change comes when three people, from different worlds with different paths, discover light in one another, and that light becomes a door that anyone can walk through.